Welcome to Live from the Vault, the Hero Smith podcast. I'm Chad Coleman, the founder of Hero Smith, and welcome to Live from the Vault, a raw and an unfiltered look at the world of business, entrepreneurship, and of course, we can never forget the absurdity of modern life. As always, I am delighted to welcome in my co-host, the man, the myth, the legend, DeAndre Dow. How you doing, DeAndre?
Feeling good. And yourself?
Doing great, man. Doing great.
Always good to see you.
Yeah, always wonderful to see you too. It's been too long, my friend.
Absolutely.
We've had a lot of changes. You know, we talk a lot about in our previous podcast episodes about the need to embrace change, and I'm no stranger to that with the pandemic. I know a lot of you that follow us already. We ended up transferring to a 100% virtual model, which has been really great for our clients and really great for us. And, also, kind of challenging, it's never easy when you're trying to make big changes like that. But, we're excited for what it can bring and what it can mean for our customers and all that good stuff. But enough about me and us. What about you, man? How have you been? It's been, like I said, it's been too long.
I'm busy, but I'm blessed, man. I'm alive and well, and it's good to see us on this side of the pandemic, right? It's far from over. I always tell people all the time, we've just reached another stage, we're in another phase as far as the pandemic, man. So it's always good to see you. And a billionaire told me one time, when you talk about embracing change, he said it's important that you embrace change. Otherwise, that's all you're going to have in your pocket. And I know that always. Yeah,
that's terrific.
Great. We're always having to constantly reinvent ourselves and navigate through another storm.
Yeah, indeed. And it's one of those situations where, it's just simply the nature of the way things are. Things are constantly changing. And so if, as entrepreneurs, the more actively and effectively we embrace that change, the better off we can be, because we can adapt. One of the things I love about running a small business is that we tend to be a little more amenable to that change.
Yes, absolutely.
And speaking of changes, we've got a whole new format here. In the past we did this podcast audio only style, and now we're transferring over to doing live video style, and it's nice. It's different, but it's going to be a lot of fun, and I think we can help a lot of small businesses in this way, which I'm really excited about. And speaking of being excited, I'm truly honored to have our guest today, who is an accomplished communication expert, an author, a public speaker, and a management consultant, and one of America's foremost experts on effective communication. And if anything, is near and dear to my heart as a marketing guy, it would be effective communication. So with that, I would like to welcome in David Firth. David, wonderful to see you. How are you doing?
Yeah, I'm doing great, Chad. Thank you. Great to be here. Thank you for the introduction.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, absolutely. It's wonderful to be here. I'm adjusting my camera around to make this thing make sense here, so I'm not all blocked. But yeah, I know it's such a pleasure to have you. And speaking of things virtual, it looks like you're coming to us from quite a nice little virtual studio there.
That's right. Courtesy of my good wife, Kerry, who, when we realized that I may not be on a plane quite so much in the future as I have been in the past.
Right. Yeah.
And in the workshops that I used to do live in the room, I was known for wandering around an awful lot and using the full visual experience sort of thing. And so I did not want to be trapped behind a Zoom camera for the rest of my life. So my wife helped me put together this studio, so at least I could stand up and move around a little bit.
It's awesome. Yeah, it looks great, man. I'm sure your clients, really appreciate the kind of depth that you went to offer that, and that's super cool. I'm sure it helps you communicate, which is obviously your area of expertise. But it's funny. Like, a lot of entrepreneurs that I know kind of came to their businesses in unique ways. And I think your story of how you became a management consultant, around the idea of communication is really, really interesting. Would you mind sharing like how you became an expert in communication with us?
Yeah, and so I'm very aware we're going a long way back. Now, as is evidenced by all the grey hair here. But yeah, I mean, it's a long, interesting route. I am from a generation in the UK, because as you can probably tell from my accent, I'm from England, where back in the day, apparently you were allowed to be good at one academic subject, and the others, if you were good at one thing, that was all the teachers cared about. And my thing was English language and literature. I mean, from my earliest memories, I can remember writing stories and being around stories as a 4 or 5-year-old, being asked to read them out in front of an audience at school, which was back then terrifying for me. And all the way through my academic career, that's the one thing I loved and one thing I was apparently good at. And then I was fortunate to go to Oxford University to study English literature and language deeper, and came across an awful lot of huge experts in that field. And all of this left me with this fascination for language and words, and how they impact us and what they make us think and feel and see. And while I was at university, I got fascinated by the theatre world. So I was a member of both local and university level theatre troupes there. I got fascinated by performance and left university, and I'm talking the mid-80s now, and set up a theatre company with a good friend of mine, Alan Lee. And for the next 6 years, we toured the world with our theatre company, writing, directing, and performing these shows to people in widely different cultures, Japan, South Korea, North America, Ghana in Africa. Just amazing experience. And then towards the end, what became the end of that experience, when Al and I were beginning to think, do we want to carry on with this, or should we try something else? We had the fortune to meet a guy called Peter Soul, who said, he was a big director in a big insurance agency in London in the UK. And he said, you guys know something about communication. I want you to teach it to my IT department, because my IT department can't communicate for toffee, as we say in England. We can't communicate for toffee. And so you teach them and fix them as communicators. And Al and I were like, we don't know anything about communication. We know theatre and whatever. And he said, no, you do know something about communication. So Al and I went off and we put together this 2-day workshop about communication based on the principles that we'd learned and experienced over those last 6 years in theatre. And Peter, soul bless him, said, if we like it, we'll pay you, and if we don't like it, we won't pay you.
It's the beginning of a lot of entrepreneurial journeys.
For young actors, he was like, tell me about it. We're not in this for the money, sort of thing. Thankfully, we liked it, and he gave us a check, and he gave us 5 contacts from his Rolodex, because back in the day, it was a Rolodex of his contacts, and he gave us 5 people from the Rolodex, and we were off. And so, in the early days, we were doing sort of basically presentation skills training for big corporations, and then my career has got moved on from there into all sorts of leadership, impact, collaboration, presence, all that great stuff.
Yeah, it's been an incredible journey. It's been so fun working with you and learning about how you came to this. I wanted you to share that with our audience. I think that, what I love about your work is that you take such a unique perspective on communication. It's unlike anything I've ever read, in the marketing, textbooks or marketing works, and it's so unique. What do you think that most business leaders fundamentally misunderstand about communication?
Yeah, well, and I don't blame them, by the way, for what they think about communication, because one of the things that I believe is true. I talk about the power of stories to make you think about certain things and believe certain things and see certain things. The world has a story about communication, which it is not thought to reconsider ever since we were cave people, and that basic fundamental, what I call the default story of communication, is that basically, if your audience right now drew me communication, my guess that 99% of you would draw two stick figures separated by a gap, and then you draw some sort of arrow to indicate that one person was talking to another, and maybe another arrow underneath to indicate that that person was replying. And it's that fundamental mental model story about communication, which certainly all business leaders are taught in. And the idea is that what you need are certain skills as the leader to get your point across. And that's the phrase we use in English: get my point across, get my story across, sell my strategy across this apparent gap, because success looks like this person here having what's in your mind here in their head. That's what success looks like. And the more you can get your point across that gap so that this person has the same story as you in their head, it looks like communication effectiveness and leadership communication effectiveness. Unfortunately, I'd say that same model is the explanation for a lot of breakdown of communication in businesses, in relationships, and is certainly the breakdown of societies and neighborhoods and whatever.
So it's almost like, it's almost like it appears that folks are fundamentally sort of misunderstanding, the nature of it in and of itself. And what I love about your work is you talk about communications and not about warring parties. It's not a battle, but that's kind of how we've kind of come to, that's the story we've been told about communication, as you put it, isn't it?
Absolutely. I've just literally, before I got on the podcast with you, came off a call with a client. I'm going out to see them on Wednesday. And apparently the biggest problem this team is facing, and they have an awful lot of big challenges outside of this particular team, but the biggest problem they're saying is they just can't tell the truth to each other. They've got all sorts of stuff inside their heads which they're not saying to each other. All of them know that that's the problem, but don't feel that they can't say it for whatever reason. And in the absence of actually sharing what they have for each other, about each other, in the context of something bigger than themselves and their anxiety about sharing that, whatever, they just carry on in this crappy environment, which is now beginning to impact the performance of not just the team, but the company.
Right. David, you just hit the key word on the head, my man, as far as environment. And I feel like that really falls on the shoulders of the organization. I took a class back in college called Organizational Behavior, just studying the overall culture of these organizations. And I feel like it's an organization's responsibility to create an environment to where staff, administrative, employees feel comfortable in truly expressing themselves without having to feel restricted.
Yeah, I agree with you. Absolutely. And I'd like to start even earlier somehow. I'd like to start even earlier so that kids as children learnt that we're not actually about to grow up into a world of warring parties. It may look like that, but fundamentally, actually, we're all committed to very similar things, which are things like happiness and peace and fun and all that sort of stuff. And then we fall apart from that, but at least we're committed to that level. So yes, I'd love to have people enter the organization with that mindset that actually maybe we are all committed to the same things, and what do we want to do about that together? But certainly then, to create that environment. And I would actually say that they don't need to create that environment. They need to remove what's ever in the way of that environment. Because fundamentally, if we're all committed to the same thing, we know fundamentally that telling the truth to each other is a good thing. I when I was writing the book, Unconditional Communication, I took myself off to a hotel, locked myself in the middle of the pandemic into a hotel so I could get some productive work done on it. Noticed that the bar across the room was open, so it was about that time in the pandemic, and went for a just to get the muse awake again. Went for a margarita, and the barman, being a good barman, asked me why I was in the town I was in. And I said, I'm here to write a book. He said, what's the book about? He said, communication. I said, communication. He said, oh, man, me and my girlfriend need to communicate so much better.
Mm-hmm.
So much better. And the way he said it was not like, I need to develop the skill of communication so that my girlfriend thinks I'm a really good communicator. He instinctively knew that health and well-being between two people, or a team, or society, or a neighborhood, or whatever, is predicated on things like openness, transparency, mutual trust.
Right, which is a lot easier said than done, David. They said, you have nothing to fear from knowing the truth because you're going to be better off in the long run. And
Absolutely.
I'd rather tell you things that you need to hear as opposed to the things that you want to hear. But once again, that's easier said than done. So how would you essentially encourage or inspire people to kind of like embrace that approach?
Yeah, so there's two things, and I'll take more time on the second one than the first, because the first one is about this idea is I'd love to be able to change that big story in the world that fundamentally this is what life is like. Yeah, because it's not true, and it causes a lot more suffering than it causes happiness. But that's an aspirational thing for me to change the world by changing how children are educated. The second thing I would say is that the only reason that you and I would tell the truth to each other is because we are committed to something bigger than this conversation we're about to have. So I often use the metaphor of the marriage as a metaphor for that. My wife and I have been married 31 years. We still have big arguments, but we can have those arguments because we are still committed to being married. Yeah. And so, at the beginning when I joined, you were talking about entrepreneurship. Entrepreneurship is fundamentally, I believe, about sharing big stories with the world. What if we could do this? What if we could have this? What if we could have this product, this service? So it's getting big stories out there for people then to live into by hopefully purchasing the product or service. So the thing is, we need to be able to stop focusing on do we have the skills to tell each other the truth, but focusing more on what's the shared purpose we're in here that will allow us to tell the truth.
That's fascinating. That's fascinating, David. Yeah, a lot on this podcast we talk about, having a big vision for your brand, for your business, to get it out there. And I think that it's really interesting to think about the fact that communication is so multi-layered in the sense that, like, you can have the best vision for your company in the world, but if you can't effectively explain that and communicate that to the team, then they're not going to be able to kind of take it, in themselves and run with it on your behalf. And yet, so it's like, it almost seems like, communication is such an all-encompassing concept.
Mm-hmm.
There's few things in a business that literally affect every part of a business. And do you think it's fair to say communication is one of those things?
Yeah, I've yet to have somebody point to something which is not affected or produced by communication in your life, let alone a business. It's so and again, the reason people struggle with that challenge is because, again, we are taught to think of this model of two stick figures talking to each other and hopefully then listening to each other. So we're in a set of behaviors and practices here, but it's bigger than that. When I'm thinking about your brand or your service or your company or whatever, that's not happening through talking. It's going on in here, which is communication. I'm telling myself a story about your service, and that story inside my head, like all stories do, is affecting how I think and feel and see things, and then how I behave. So the model of communication is talking and listening is just, it doesn't begin to capture. I talk about, communication is not something we do. It's an ocean in which we swim, and we're all in it. We're all connected by that. It's inside us. It's like in our thoughts and our feelings, and it's outside us in our behaviors, whatever. But we are all part of that same community, that same ocean.
Yeah, we're either sinking, swimming, or treading water, right?
Well, if you see somebody in the ocean drowning, you either help or not. It's
Right.
But again, this the other problem with this default model is that we teach leaders then the skills of persuasion, influence, and selling as 3 fundamental tools they need to get their point across. And that's certainly, after 30 years of doing this work in the business world, when people sign up for my workshops, I talk with them one-to-one in advance. I say, what do you want to get out of this? They'll say, I want to be more persuasive. I want to be able to influence my boss or my team or whatever. I want to sell my strategy to the people who make the decision. All of that sounds so normal and necessary and obvious. And then I say, tell me about the last time you were sold something. How much do you look forward to? When you went to that new car and you were walking into the sales office, where you think, I can't wait. Can't wait for that salesman to start selling something to me. Or when did you last join a meeting and thought, I just want to be persuaded by somebody else? No, we don't. What we're really doing when we join a meeting is saying, I hope I can join. I hope I can share what I have to say about this thing. I hope I can give my perspective. I hope I can work with people and collaborate on what this thing is, So the very things that we ask for to improve communication, we ourselves do not want.
And you think it's because of the way humans are raised in that adversarial kind of communicative thing that breeds that, where it's like, in most things, it's like, well, if I want something, it's karma. I treat people the way I want to be treated, the golden rule and all that kind of stuff. It's so interesting that in this one area, it's like, oh, I don't want to be persuaded. I don't want to be sold. In fact, I always tell people, no one likes to be sold, right? Thank goodness everyone likes to buy. but not my quote, but a great one. Do you think it's just the way we were raised that led to that kind of disconnect there? And then it is.
Yeah, we are brought into this model of we're separate and it's a warring party of some sort going on here. And business leadership looks like having a strong point of view and getting up and holding the space at the corporate town hall and what. And that's fine to a degree, And I want to know what the company's strategy is next year. So a degree of being able to get to the point and share my message about next year's strategy with a level of heart as well as head and all that sort of great stuff. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
But when we're being asked to collaborate on complex, big problems, and then I go to the world's problems at the moment, nobody's coming along on their own to persuade us that they've got an idea to fix climate change, for example. It's not working that way. And even if they did, it would depend on the rest of the world collaborating with that possibility and making it so through their actions. So the work for me is to get away from the model of what the world needs is more persuasion, influencing, and selling, and what the world actually needs is more invitation into collaboration.
Nice, excellent. So a lot of the tenets of what you're talking about are in this book, Unconditional Communication. Sorry, I'm trying to make it look good on camera there. I recommend, it can be gotten on Amazon and pretty much anywhere books are sold, but Amazon's a great place to get it. And just for folks that haven't had the chance to dive into it yet, can you kind of break down the essential tenets of what you deem unconditional communication?
Yeah, the 3 foundational elements of unconditional communication. Well, let me tell you about the context first of all. Yeah, so the context of this is that what is unconditional communication? Best way of answering that is the opposite of conditional communication. What is conditional communication? Pretty much everything we have at the moment. Yeah, which is I need to get my point across to you, and persuade you that I am right. Yeah. And so what's at stake there is me and my ego and my message. Yeah. And a degree of that may be healthy. A lot of it, not healthy.
Mm.
Unconditional communication is, I, as a leader, as an entrepreneur, I'm up to something bigger than me and my little needs. Yeah, I'm into bigger possibilities. So I'm going to share with you the possibility for this business, this vision, this dream, and see if together we can make it even better than what I had in my mind alone. Because if you can see that story for yourself and begin to act yourself into it, together we could do something truly extraordinary, which is by definition outside of the confines of what I'm thinking at the moment. So that's the context. Unconditional is inviting something to something bigger than just our individual needs and wants. Yeah. And then the 3 tenets are, number 1, unconditional communication is characterized by presence, simply being there with somebody else. And this team I'm talking about at the moment gets together 3 times a week and probably is not present at all, because in their heads they're thinking about what they really think about each other, or what they've got coming up next, or what happened last week, or whatever. They're not present, even though they're physically in the same room. And I think presence in this crazy, stressful, anxious world is a gift that we can give to each other, to be present with each other. Number 2, connection. So out of that presence gets this sense of we're really all connected. We're really all here. And what is the quality of that connection? It's being of service to each other. So not what shall I say and how shall I say it, but who is my audience and what do they need? And how can I satisfy that need? Because if we can satisfy that need, then we're into that place where we can begin to collaborate, as opposed to be worried about our individual needs. Then the 3rd level is where the action actually happens, because a lot of people listen to me talking about unconditional communication and think it's all woo-woo and tree hugging and whatever. And it's not. The 3rd level is co-created outcomes, which is basically, if we're going to take an action together, we will make some promises and requests of each other. So you made a request that I was here at a certain time today, and here I am. And so the podcast is working. It may be happening or not, maybe in a good way, but it's happening. Yeah. If I don't turn up on time, or if I don't turn up at all, the whole thing breaks down. And so for me, one of the things the world is missing as well is we've stopped requesting of each other to make big promises together.
Right. It's like we've just given up hope in the other side, right? It's just like, they're not ever going to do this. And then, you mentioned the environment earlier and climate change. And to me, it's like, I miss, that to me is like an issue that I don't care what side of the political spectrum that you're on. We all share this planet, and whether you're, an outdoorsman who likes to hunt and or someone that just, wants to live in a warm climate, but not, have their power go out, or, it just seems like, we're fundamentally like missing each other. And I think you hit on something there, really, with all 3 of the tenets. But do you feel like they're sequential? Like, do we have to, is the idea that you have to have presence, connection, and then you can take the action together?
Yeah, I do. I really do. It's a great question, and I don't think I've ever thought about it before, but the answer is yes. Because in the absence, here's another woo-woo thing, I believe, yeah? I think we're all energetic creatures. We sense each other's energy. We explain it as all the old things to do with communication, like body language and all that sort of stuff, yeah? But energetically, I know if you are present or not. Energetically, and the thing is, when I sense that you're not really here now, my mind will kick into gear about, what's this person's agenda? Yeah. So in the absence of presence, we make up each other's agenda, and then we're already beginning to separate into these 2 things. Yeah. So I think presence is the fundamental thing. Connection, if I can build on my sense of presence with you and demonstrate through how I talk with you, through the invitations I make, through the questions I ask, as opposed to the persuasive statements I make, that you and I are committed to the same thing, or that's the thing to talk about, then that will feel better than this person's trying to persuade me of their point of view and ask me if I like it or not. And then the third level is, and only on the basis of those two things can we truly make, real promises and requests. Just like when we get married, whether it's a religious ceremony or a civic ceremony, we talk about, through the connecting bit, we talk about the promise we're about to make to each other. That in sickness and in health, in poor times and in rich times, in good times and bad, etc. Till death us do part. We talk about the contract so that it's out there in the open. And then when the person says, do you take this woman or this man? We know the promise we're about to make. And we can say yes or no.
So we've kind of set that stage. We've defined the terms, right? And
right.
Yeah. That's excellent.
Yeah.
DeAndre, so I read this quote by you, and I thought it was pretty profound, so I wanted to share it. I hope it doesn't embarrass you, because you are a humble man indeed, but more humble than you should be, probably. Every conversation you have is a pebble cast into a pond. It may ripple out to the edge and disappear, or it could be the one that changes a project, a life, a world. So you believe fundamentally that that our interactions are life-changing. Whether it be in a company, in a marriage, in a political movement.
Yeah.
Expound upon that for me, if you don't mind.
Well, I mean, the big request in that is, whether or not you believe that to be true, I believe that to be true, yes. And whether or not you believe it or not, the request is to say to the reader, to the listener, to the viewer, if tomorrow we could all be 10% more intentional about what comes out of this hole in the front of our head than not, let's see what that feels like and what it produces.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's not like we need more noise in the world. I did some research when I was writing the book that said that apparently on average we speak 14,000 words every day, every one of us.
Wow.
14,000. And I would guess that a lot of those words just tumble out of the front of our head and out into the world. And then we see, I wonder if that made any difference or what difference, or do we not even think about what difference it made?
Mm-hmm.
And so all I'm requesting is maybe of those 40, maybe we can cut the 14,000 down a bit,
Just a couple thousand.
and then just the old idea of, this is not a new idea, this is a very old idea, thinking before we speak,
I was going to say it's a fundamental lesson from Mom, right? That goes way back.
Right.
Yeah, if you can't think of anything nice to say, don't say anything at all, my mum used to say. And it sounds so banal. And yet there's an awful lot of people on this planet who just like, no, I have a right to speak. I've got my needs, which I need to defend. Otherwise, sometimes, somebody's going to trample on my needs. So I need to get it out here. I'm going to just speak it into the world and see what happens.
And it's crazy to think about how many different ways we have available to us as far as ways to communicate. Where back in the day, it used to be the telegram, the pager. Nowadays, we got Facebook, we got Zoom, we got text messaging, we got social media platforms. Yet these platforms have essentially hindered our ability to communicate with one another. And I think it actually falls in alignment with the lack of the tenets as far as being present and not being able to have that connection, especially when you're text messaging or emailing,
Sure.
God forbid tweeting.
But I absolutely, yes. And one of the other things that's happened over the last 10 or 15 years is this whole idea that we are a customer in our lives, and that a lot of that stuff that we write on Twitter or Facebook or whatever it is there to say, this thing I'm talking about didn't make me happy. We can't have any service experience in the world at the moment without giving a feedback form. And that's fair enough. You know, if I go to a restaurant and I pay a lot of money for a fabulous meal with my family and I put down a few $100, then yeah, if it's not good, I want to be able to say, you know, I don't think it was worth $400, that meal. You know?
Mm-hmm.
But then to take that experience and say, my whole life, I'm a customer in my life, and the world should make me happy. And I want to make sure that the world knows when I'm not happy. Give me the microphone. Give me the social media thing. And it's everybody's got an opinion.
And do you think that like these new formats, while they increase the speed of communication and maybe the sort of bandwidth of it, or the how far it can go, one tweet can go worldwide, right?
Yeah.
Do you think that despite the power in that, do you think that the lack of even of having, or I guess maybe a better way to put it is the fact that you have like a collective out there as opposed to an individual affects how people communicate through these platforms?
Yeah, well, let me answer in a slightly different way. Is that I strongly believe that eventually we will make social media what I think it probably was intended to be, which is a connective thing, a collaborative thing, sharing in the healthy way thing, a tool for solving problems together. I think we will get to that. I believe in that everything's an upward spiral. I think we're down here at the moment. We're too fascinated by cute cat videos and toxic argument. I'm optimistic that we will all grow past that. I don't know if it's going to happen in the next 5 years, 10 years, 100 years, whatever, but eventually we'll say, hang on. And this is one of the outcomes of the pandemic. I have other consultants in my world who have done some extraordinary work virtually, which they'd never have been able to do face to face. One of my colleagues works up in the Yukon, on a community project, and in the face-to-face world, those people would never have traveled from their small village or town to the city nearby to be part of a community gathering. They wouldn't have done. But we can now get the technology to them, which allows their voice to be heard in this big community conversation. And so that's a thing happening right now, which is it's a really healthy, positive way that we can use digital and social media.
You're very ambitious, my man, especially when we're living in a cancel culture right now, where it's like, if you don't agree with the collective opinion, you get canceled straight up.
Sure.
So I hope you're right. It feels like we're so far from that right now, but I definitely believe that's what these platforms were essentially created to ultimately do at the best version, at the peak of what they were intended and created for.
Yeah, I agree. I don't think they were. Anyway, how do I know what they're thinking? But I agree. Whether or not their intentions were that or not, I think together we will actually claim it.
And I think we got to give ourselves a little bit of grace in the fact that like this is still new. To a lot of people. I know there's super savvy people that jump on the latest thing, and that's good. They're embracing change. We talked about that before you joined us, David. But yeah, we're just infants in communicating this way. It's almost like I want to just like, I wish I had a mic and just go up and talk to the whole world at once and tap, tap, tap. Excuse me, guys. Everyone, you're communicating with everyone, and everyone can hear you, and they're real humans on the other end of that tweet.
Sure.
So act accordingly. And I think that's just an evolutionary process that we'll go to. And it's nice to hear that you're optimistic about where that can go, because the promise of a world, we've seen the power of crowdsourcing in our lives. Scientists do this all the time. They come up with mRNA or any of these technologies, and they put it out there and let people kind of like work with it and see it and share this knowledge. And I think imagine the problems we could solve.
Yes.
If we could all harness the power of humanity and more effectively use these platforms to communicate.
That's right. And actually, just pick up on something you said there about, we share these things, use it, gives you feedback, give us, make it better. That sourcing thing going on. I'm saying a similar thing for a lot of communication. Not all communication, but just this idea of take my words, do something with them, make them better, bring it back. Let's bring it into a room of 3 or 4, now a room of 100. Let's see what we can work together with them. As opposed to this whole idea that, there's something in here which, the world is crying out for.
Yeah.
As long as they get exactly this, that will be the perfect outcome. And it cannot be, particularly for the big, complex problems that we're facing at the moment.
And it's really interesting to think about, I think part of the reason doesn't seem to be trending in the direction that sounds like we both, all 3 of us, hope that it will go, is because these algorithms are so good at feeding into our own biases.
Sure.
I'm a progressive guy, so I get all the progressive tweets that I, and I see all the, that stuff. And then there becomes, what I think is really scary about where we're at as a culture, is that there becomes 2 realities. And just like you mentioned in the communication thing, where it's this adversarial relationship, gosh, I think when you have 2 separate realities and 2 sets of facts and all that stuff, it's dangerous. So it's almost like, to me, like some brilliant entrepreneur, hopefully listening to this podcast right now, is going to have to figure out, how do we determine in a completely objective way what is fact and what is propaganda,
Mm.
No easy task, right?
Yeah. Language is slightly different, and I have a model which I use with a lot of the business leaders I work with. That I call it the two boxes model, one box inside another. And I said the box you want to talk about, or the box that you think is the fact or the truth or the numbers are correct, whatever. That's great, and it's true. Don't worry about it. I'm not saying it's not true. I'm just saying there's another box around it, and that box is labeled the story about the facts, the story about the numbers, the story about the data. Yeah, and the point is that people are motivated actually by the story and not the facts. Yeah,
absolutely.
So when most of the planet woke up to the idea that the planet was actually round, that fact came into our consciousness. But what caused people to build big ships and go off on adventures was the story about what's possible, because that fact is true.
Mm-hmm.
What might lay over that horizon if it's not a steep drop into infinity or whatever? Yeah, what could be across there? What might we find? What might we?
A new route to India.
Yeah, and then I realized this metaphor was going to go in a direction.
Well, no,
the British sailed to a lot of places to make the world better and more British.
Right. So
David, I got a question for you, man. Kind of just to wrap this thing up.
Uh-huh.
What would you say is the underlying purpose of communication, and why is it so important, especially when it comes to entrepreneurship?
Well, I believe the underlying purpose of communication is actually held in the origin of the word communication. And this is me being my language geek, because it's all I was ever good at, it's the only expertise I have. The origin of the word communication is a Latin verb, communicare, which does not mean to speak. It does not mean to tell. It does not mean to persuade or influence or sell. It means to share. Yeah, and actually, if you go down deeper than that, com means together. So communication, the people who created this word in the very origins were actually talking about a collaborative thing and not a cross a gap thing from its very origins, but we forgot that apparently. And mean is a M-U-N in the middle of that is a word that basically means meaning. It's a shared meaning. And so communication is I believe, the art, the act, the science of creating shared meaning, such that we want to act on it together. Yeah. What has that got to do with entrepreneurship? I think it's about sharing, just being so grateful, so happy, so proud of yourself that you've got yourself into the position where you're not locked in some big organization wondering if you can tell the truth or not, but you can share your meaning for the world. And if people buy it, wonderful. If they don't, there's another opportunity to make it better.
I love that answer. That's really good. I really resonate with that. So much of the work, obviously, like, we are all about, like, measuring results, and we live in an amazing time with all this data, and all these platforms to help businesses grow. But so much of that work will land hollow if we haven't figured out what that shared purpose is, that real fundamental and authentic connection that a company has with its customers, and I think that what I find fascinating about working, knowing you and reading your books, is that communication is that ocean, like you said, the ocean that we're both swimming in, and it's a matter of, like, if we can effectively do that. And I think we both kind of work with businesses in different ways. I think, I kind of tend to focus on the outward communication, the communication that's going to, draw people to an organization and hopefully, become a sale or a lead. And I think, I'm certainly, the work you do can help in that for sure. But I think you focus a lot more on the internal, right? How do we get this shared vision? How do we bring this to a new place?
Yeah.
And take
And how does it feel coming from that place? Because I guess that's the other thing, the other thing about unconditional communication for me is to ask the question, where am I coming from when I say what I'm saying?
Right. That's that context piece, right? That's
context piece, yeah, and particularly the context I could be in control of. Because if my context is that I'm here to fix you or punish you or belittle you or let me tell you how wrong you are, well, look at the world. I would not advise it as a strategy. It will feel good in the moment. Yeah, it will make you feel good that you got that off your chest, but it will produce nothing of value in the world, And again, we're back to this idea that we need to get to a place where individual leaders, entrepreneurs, and groups of people can be committed to something bigger than their own desire to get stuff off their chests and feel better in the moment. We've got to be capable of more than that. I hope.
Yes, I certainly hope so. And well, you're right. It is cathartic, right? It feels good in the moment, but it's a temporary, positive, or, well, it seems like it's positive, but it's temporary.
It's I've just come back from a week's vacation with my Kerry and my 3 boys, and they're men now. They're young men, and yet they're still brothers who've grown up together. And so we were out there, and every so often they get into this together. It's like, guys, you're adults now. Stop that. Why do they carry on doing it? Because it feels good just to, tease my brother or belittle my brother for a moment, And then,
right. Yeah, I'm sure some of that stuff is like habitual, right? Like they grew up doing that. It's like riding a bike. I haven't ridden a bike in, a year or something, but I pick it up and start riding it again, just like that. I'm sure brothers, and I'm actually going to see my sisters in the next few days, and then I'm sure we'll be doing the same thing.
Yeah.
For me, last question. I wanted to get one more because we're both, I think we both owe a debt of gratitude to Joseph Campbell, and his, seminal works in understanding the fundamentals of story and how they integrate into our lives, and how fundamentally human, the idea of storytelling is. Could you, that's not really a question. I realize that's what I'm saying it, but could you speak to the monomyth, the storytelling methodology that
just left my
it's right there, right? Yeah. That's what
Yeah, so I mean, I want to explain that there's plenty of great stuff out there. I would heartily recommend anybody who's not familiar with the hero's journey to access a documentary called Finding Joe, which was made a couple of years back about Joseph Campbell and the hero's journey. It was just a spectacular introduction to what it is. The first thing, Chad, that came to mind when you mentioned Joseph Campbell was that quotation he has about, what is a hero? A hero is, and it doesn't say a hero is, a guy with a spear and a sword and a shield, a guy is a human being committed to something bigger than themselves. So again, we're back to this theme I've been talking about all the way through, which is there's got to be something bigger than getting my needs satisfied in my life. And maybe that looks like helping others, serving others, or co-creating apparently impossible things together. So that's the first thing I'd say about the hero's journey. The other is that the other really comforting thing for me about the whole hero's journey is that we think that the journey is all about the quest, which in the mythic times was about slaying the dragon or finding the hidden gold or whatever it is. But actually the completion of the journey is coming home, returning home with the treasure. And symbolically, the treasure doesn't mean the head of the dragon or the bag of gold. It means the insight that you've got from going through that, And so for me, that's true all the time, whether we are, a one-parent family bringing up kids in wherever, or we are in a big organization or whatever. What's the journey we are on, and what's the treasure that's possible here? And just as a final point, I'd say that, my passion at the moment is to talk about this pandemic has got to have been about something bigger than can we all use Zoom now?
Yes, sir.
Got it. What is the treasure? We know what the quest was, and the quest wasn't much fun. Right. There was a lot of pain. There was a lot of suffering. It doesn't matter. Could it have been different or whatever? There's still treasure. And what is the treasure? That again takes being present together and connecting together, and then hopefully making some promises and requests together.
Terrific, David. Well, this has been incredible. Thank you so much again for joining us, and it's always a pleasure to speak with an expert in communication like yourselves. Everyone, go out and get Unconditional Communication. Check it out on Amazon.com. Just search for either David Firth or Unconditional Communication. David, thanks again for joining us. We hope you can come back and join us again sometime.
I would love that. Thank you both. It's been fun.
Absolutely. Right. Peace and blessings to you, David.
Thank you. And you. Take care.
All right. We'll talk again soon. Thanks. Wow, that was incredible, right? What an amazing set of insights that David brought to the table.
Right. I feel like I just got baptized, man. I feel more empathetic.
Yeah.
I wasn't knowing what to expect, but I'm like, damn, I'm looking at all my unhealthy ways of communicating now. You can't help but think about that kind of shit. After you talk to a guy like that.
Yeah.
So yeah, totally. Girl, because I was just talking at her.
Yep. I was having little nightmares about exes and former employees, and it's like, oh, I see what I did wrong there.
Yeah.
No, it's fascinating. And when you're, what's fascinating about David too is that this is battle-tested stuff. I mean, the guy's been doing it for 25 years.
Yeah.
He's been, out there and really getting into, when you work in communication, you really get into the essence of the business itself and the real issues, because as we learned, there's underlying stuff there, and so it's really fascinating to get, that kind of expertise, and share that with us to help us all us entrepreneurs be better leaders.
Yes, sir.
So it was terrific, man. Thanks for joining. It was awesome to reconnect with you. Yes, we're going to try to do these more often and do them this way, and so people get the kind of the full experience of being able to see us and not just hear us.
Right.
So yeah, man. So until next time, this has been Live from the Vault, the Smith Podcast, and we'll see you next time, guys. Thanks.